We have all the cards. We're not going to spend 15 hours in airplanes all the time going back and forth to be giving a document that was not good enough. I'll deal with whoever's running the show. They don't know. They are fighting with each other. There's tremendous infighting.
Iran's parliament speaker appears to be taunting Trump ahead of the Putin-Araghchi diplomacy track, with Mohammad Bagher Qalibaf framing Tehran as the side that still holds the stronger strategic cards despite US pressure. Qalibaf's latest messaging can be read as a direct answer to Trump's repeated claims about holding all the cards, especially because he has cast Iran's leverage in terms of oil routes, shipping pressure, and economic pain for US consumers. The verbal war over oil also seems to be intensifying just as Iran's reported new offer helped stabilize markets, with coverage pointing to relief in stocks and a steadier dollar after talk of a proposal tied to reopening Hormuz. At the same time, Russia may be trying to increase pressure on Trump before Putin hosts Abbas Araghchi, as senior Russian envoy Mikhail Ulyanov publicly argued that US threats, sanctions, and strength-based diplomacy have all failed against Iran. Iran's parliament speaker appears to have issued a direct warning to the United States over energy leverage, arguing that Tehran still holds what he described as key energy and shipping cards in the confrontation. Mohammad Bagher Qalibaf pushed back against fresh US pressure by suggesting Iran retains decisive strategic options, while American tools are becoming more limited and more expensive to use. Iranian media and regional coverage framed the message as an attempt to puncture US bravado over energy leverage, with Qalibaf contrasting Iran's control over choke points and supply routes against Washington's reliance on market management and reserve releases. Mohammad Bagher Qalibaf said, and I quote, "They brag about the cards. Let's see. Supply cards equals demand cards. SOH, partly played, plus BEM, unplayed, plus pipelines, unplayed, equals INV release, played, plus demand destruction, partly played, plus more price adjective, to come, add summer vacation to the right unless they want to cancel it for the US." Unquote. Analysts viewed Mohammad Bagher Qalibaf's message as a calm, factual warning to US policymakers rather than a burst of rhetoric, according to Press TV's characterization of the statement. Qalibaf appeared to warn Washington not to confuse temporary market maneuvers with genuine strategic strength, arguing that short-term price management does not amount to lasting leverage. That argument rested on the claim that Iran has only partially activated its options so far, including pressure points linked to the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. By contrast, the US was portrayed as having already burned through its easiest tools, especially strategic petroleum reserve releases and other near-term demand-side measures. Amid that backdrop, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi arrived in Russia on April 27 at the head of a diplomatic delegation as Tehran continued regional and great power consultations. At nearly the same moment, a senior Russian envoy publicly backed Tehran on April 26 just before the Iranian minister's Moscow visit, reinforcing the impression of coordinated political support. Russia's permanent representative to international organizations in Vienna, Mikhail Ulyanov, sharply criticized US policy toward Iran in remarks released over the weekend. Ulyanov said Washington's long-running habit of negotiating from a position of strength had failed in the Iran case and no longer offered a workable path forward. He added that military threats and what he called illegal sanctions had also failed against Iran, and argued that the United States would have to abandon blackmail, ultimatums, and artificial deadlines. Stock markets rose after reports said Iran had offered the United States a new proposal, with equities advancing as investors interpreted the move as a possible step toward easing regional tensions and restoring oil flows. Bloomberg-linked reporting said Iran's latest proposal was aimed at reopening the Strait of Hormuz, with a reported framework pairing a reopening move with a delay in nuclear negotiations. Markets stabilized as those reports fueled expectations that some form of diplomacy could restart after a failed second round of talks, even though the broader negotiating track still appeared fragile. The dollar also turned steadier as news of the Iranian proposal surfaced, with market coverage showing investors reassessing haven demand as the possibility of renewed talks briefly improved sentiment. US President Donald Trump has issued a fresh ultimatum to Iran, this time giving Tehran 3 days. Trump told Fox News that Iran now has 3 days before its oil pipelines explode from within. He also claimed there would be permanent damage to Iran's oil wells if oil flow is not restored. Donald Trump said, and I quote, "What happens is that line explodes from within. Both mechanically and in the earth. Something happens where it just explodes, and they say they only have about 3 days left before that happens. And when it explodes, you can never rebuild it the way it is." It's a very powerful thing that takes place sort of having to do with nature." Unquote. According to Trump, the ongoing US blockade would create catastrophic mechanical stress inside Iran's oil infrastructure. He further claimed that this pressure could trigger spontaneous explosions underground and within transport lines. However, energy experts say pipelines are typically equipped with safety valves and sensors designed to halt pumping before such failure spiral. They also note that if oil cannot move through the system, operators usually stop production at the source itself. That is why some experts believe Iran may still have roughly 2 to 3 months of inland storage before any forced production cut becomes necessary. Iran's vice president and head of the Strategic Energy Policy and Management Organization, Ismail Sagab Esfahani, has also reacted. Esfahani warned that Iran would retaliate against countries backing any damage to its oil sector. In a sharp response on X, he said, "Our math is different. 1 oil well equals 4 oil wells." Ismail Sagab Esfahani said, and I quote, "If any part of our infrastructure, including oil wells, is damaged as a result of a blockade, we guarantee that 4 times the damage will be inflicted on the same infrastructure in countries that support the aggressor. Our math is different. 1 oil well equals 4 oil wells." Unquote. Despite an intense US naval blockade on Iranian ports, new data suggests the strategy is far from airtight, with Tehran continuing to export oil in ways that undercut American pressure. The blockade, imposed on April 13th, was designed to choke off Iran's primary source of revenue by restricting ships going to and from Iranian ports, especially those carrying crude. However, evidence from satellite and tanker tracking platforms indicates that Iran has still been able to load and move significant volumes of crude oil even under the restrictions. Satellite-based maritime data showed that at least 4.6 million barrels of oil were loaded onto Iranian-linked vessels since the blockade went into effect, a figure that highlights the persistence of the export network. Roughly 4 million of those barrels reportedly crossed the blockade, according to tanker trackers, a sign that Iran is still punching holes in Washington's strategy and keeping vital revenue flowing. Reports from tanker tracking firm tankertrackers.com conclude that the blockade has disrupted but not halted Iran's oil activity, forcing traffic into more complex and opaque routes. Instead of a full shutdown, Tehran has adapted by using alternative shipping lanes and covert logistics chains to sustain its exports through third-country intermediaries and difficult-to-monitor transfers. Vessels linked to Iran have reportedly succeeded in bypassing US enforcement in the Strait of Hormuz region, according to a Wall Street Journal report on April 26, exposing gaps in the monitoring architecture. Experts say this pattern has underlined how difficult it is to fully seal off a vast and strategically critical waterway such as the Strait of Hormuz, even for a major naval power. Iran has also employed tactics such as disabling or manipulating ship tracking transponders, conducting ship-to-ship transfers at sea, and rerouting vessels through the Arabian Sea and Asian waters to evade detection. Analysts add that even when ships cannot leave the region, tankers can still be loaded with crude at Iranian ports and then later transferred at sea. Rather than a clear decisive victory, the situation has therefore evolved into a cat-and-mouse dynamic at sea, with Iran constantly adjusting its methods to keep exports moving. These developments came as President Trump announced that the US would use all its cards against Iran in the Hormuz zone.